Hey, how's it going everyone? This is Brendan Bias from checkit.com and welcome to another Walkthrough Wednesday. I'm sorry that this tutorial wasn't released on Tuesday as per usual, but you know, I've got a life too. It's not like this is my career or anything like that. I have, you know, a life outside of this, so sometimes that takes precedence over the tutorials, and I'm sorry that if that sounds kind of narcissistic or petty or anything like that, but you know, I gotta make a living. Anyway, today's tutorial is pretty straightforward and simple to do, so any beginner should be able to get through it pretty easily and all that. But the overall effect looks pretty sweet. So without further ado, let's take a look at what it is we will be creating. So as you can see, this is pretty straightforward. We got this beautiful, this simple and elegant text effect. And the thing I like most about this would definitely have to be the background that's going on here. I mean, there's this really nice little gradient going on, and you can see some diagonal lines further in the background. And then, you know, just to top it off, just adding in some text, some light particles here and there. And overall, straightforward, simple to do, but looks really nice. So now that we've got an idea of what it is we'll be creating, let's get right into this, shall we? So let's go to File, New, start up our new document. If you want to name it Elegance or something like that, you know, feel free to do so. And for the size on this, you can use whatever the heck you want, but I'm going to use the 2K standards in digital cinema, which is a width of 2048 with a height of 1080 and a resolution of 72 pixels per inch, RGB color mode, you know, all that standard stuff. So we'll hit OK. And I'm going to hit Control-0 or Command-0 if you're on a Mac to, you know, zoom in a little bit onto the canvas here. And I'm going to rename Layer 1 to BG. And I want to fill this in with a gray color. So to do that, I'm going to hit Shift Backspace. That'd be Shift Delete if you're on a Mac. And I'm going to use a color. And that color is this dark gray, which is number 3E, 3E, 3E. Rather straightforward. We'll hit OK. So there we go, got a nice gray background. And next up, I want to add in the diagonal lines on top of that. So to create these diagonal lines, I want to create a pattern. And to do that, I need to create an entirely new document for that pattern. So we'll go to File, New, and we'll change the width and height to 10 pixels by 10 pixels, and we'll hit OK. And once again, I'll hit Control-0 to zoom in a little bit onto this tiny little box over here. And I'm going to be painting in the diagonal by hand with the pencil tool. So let's go over to the brush tool and click and hold on that. And go out to this flyout menu and switch to the pencil tool. For the pencil tool, let's make sure that our opacity is at 100%. Our foreground color is set to black. And we'll set the size of this to 2 pixels. Alright, so next up, let's see here. I want to make this diagonal go from the bottom left to the top right. So I will click once in the bottom left-hand corner. I'll move up and to the right a little bit and click again, so that way the two boxes are kind of intersecting at the corners there. And then I'll basically just continue that up and to the right, again making sure that the corners of these boxes are intersecting. And so basically that's how that's going to turn out right there. And I'm going to size down my brush down to 1 pixel by hitting the left bracket key, or you can right click and change the size to 1 pixel yourself, you know, up to you. And I'm going to add a box into the top left and the bottom right, like so. And next up, I'm going to change my brush opacity to 80%. And now that my brush opacity is down just a little bit, I'm going to add a box on either side of the corners, like so. And then I'll also add in this little line along the sides of the black line that we created right there. So there you go, we've got a nice little diagonal set up right here, and we're ready to turn this into a pattern. So I'm going to select the canvas by hitting Control or Command A. And next, I'll go to Edit, and I'll go down to Define Pattern. And you can name this whatever you want. I can name it like 10 pixel diagonal, and hit OK. And now we can just go ahead and close out of this, and we do not need to save it. So next up, with our BG selected in our elegant document, let's go to Effects and apply a pattern overlay. And for this, let's click the little drop down arrow for the pattern and select our new pattern that we created, which will be the diagonals. And by default, the diagonals are a little bit too close together because that's how we made them, was, really close together and all that. So to spread these apart, I'm going to set the scale to 125%. And so that'll just kind of scale them up for make the diagonals a little further apart. Pretty straightforward. And I'm also going to change the opacity down to about 50%, so that way it blends a little bit better with the background. And with that, I will hit OK. And let's close up the effects over here. And the next thing I'm going to create is the green gradient on top of the background. So to do that, I'm going to go to Layer. We'll create a new fill layer, and we'll choose Gradients. And for this, you can name it whatever you want. Maybe we'll just do like green spotlight or something of the sort. And for this, I'm going to set the mode to screen, and we'll hit OK. And for the gradient fill, let's change the style from linear to radial. Let's set the angle to 30 degrees, and let's change the scale to 225%. Now, keep in mind that if you're in Photoshop CS5 or earlier, the max you can go up to for the scale is 150%, okay? So keep that in mind. And we'll also toggle the dither. So now let's go edit the gradient itself. So let's give that a click. And let's change up the first black slider here by giving that a double click. And I want to create this, this very bright green color here. So for that, I'm going to make the green value 255, but I'm also going to add in quite a bit of blue, so let's do about 204. And we'll get this kind of teal cyan color kind of going on here. And with that, let's hit OK. And let's go to the black slider and give that a double click as well. I'll do the same thing by going to 255 and 204. But I'm also going to click and drag this slider down a little bit to make it a little bit more green. And I'm also going to tone this down to a bit of a darker shade of green. So with that, we'll hit OK again. And before hitting OK a third time, I'm going to drag this off to the side. And you'll notice that the spotlight is right here directly in the middle. And I want to click and drag this upwards while holding Shift until it's, somewhere a little bit closer to the top up here. And that's looking pretty good, so I'll hit OK. Cool, so our background is pretty much set up, so let's go ahead and create the text. So let's swap to our text tool by hitting the letter T. The font that I'm using is called Typograph Pro, which is a free font set from Video Copilot. If you guys want me to, I'll give you a link in the description, so just look there first before you start asking where you can download it. For the style, I'm going to set it to light. The font size, I'll do 185 points. The anti-aliasing will be set to sharp, and I'll go ahead and have this align in the center, and the font color is black, but that doesn't really matter too much. So let's click somewhere in the center and type the text that we want. In my case, I'll just do elegant, and I will hit the little check mark at the top to commit that. I'm going to swap to my move tool, or you can hit the letter V to swap to that yourself. And let's select the entire canvas by hitting Control or Command A. And if we go up here to where these 6 icons are, you can go to the 5th one to align it horizontally to the center. So let's do that. And then we'll hit Control or Command D to deselect the selection there. And now you can just move this up and down to wherever you want it. I'll put it right around here, looking pretty good. And so next up, I want to style this text to make it look, a little more glassy looking. So to do that, I'm going to change the fill from 100% down to 0%. And I'm going to add an effects, and we'll do a bevel and emboss. And I'll click this off to the side so you can kind of see what's going on to the text over here. And for the depth, I'll keep that at 100%. Let's change the size to 8 pixels, and we'll change the soften to 4 pixels. And we'll keep everything else default except for the shadow mode, which will change the opacity down to 0%. So now without a shadow on the bevel, we're kind of losing the font here. It's really hard to read. So to make up for that, let's add a drop shadow below it. And I'll change the opacity to about 8%. Let's turn off the use global light and change that angle to about 60. And then I'll change the distance to 4, and maybe I'll change the size to about 4 as well. So that's looking pretty sweet, and let's hit OK. So next up, let's go ahead and add in some of those particles below the text that I showed you in the demo there. So to do that, let's swap back to our brush tool by hitting the letter B. By default, it'll be set to the pencil tool, so be sure to swap that back to the brush tool. And of course, make sure the opacity is back at 100%. And let's make our foreground color white instead of black. And of course, we need to create a new layer for our particles over here. Awesome. Whoops, I had caps lock turned on. Hey, my bad. So for the particles here, I want to use the brush tool, but I don't want to, resize the brush several times while I'm going through. I just want to simplify it a little bit more. So let's bring up our brush panel by hitting F5 on our keyboard. And for the brush tip shape, make sure you have the spacing set to 1000%. And toggle the shape dynamics. And for that, you'll put the size jitter up to 100%. And then toggle the scattering and put the scatter all the way up to 1000% as well. And so with those settings, you should be able to just click and drag along the bottom here and have some random particles here and there. Maybe I'll add in a couple more. And I don't like this one, so I'll erase it. So obviously, you would probably spend a little bit more time on that, make it look a little cleaner, I suppose. But once you've got those set, let's change the blend mode to linear dodge add. And then we'll change the fill down to about 8%, so that way they're not quite so overwhelming. And I want to add in a slight vignette around the edges just to kind of darken things up a little bit. And to do that, I'll go to Layer, New Fill Layer, Gradient. And we'll call this Vignette with the mode set to, let's do Soft Light with an opacity of 60%. Let's hit OK. And let's go to the gradient, make sure that it's set to black. Right now it's set to white. There we go. And let's see here. So let's change the style from linear to radial. Let's toggle the reverse and the dither. Let's change the angle to 0 degrees with a scale of 150%. And once again, I might drag this up a little bit while holding Shift to kind of bring in some of the shading in the bottom. All right, looking good. We'll hit OK now. And voila, that is it. Very simple, very easy to do. Anyone can do it, even if you've never done anything whatsoever in Photoshop. There it is, the elegant text effect. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. I know this was, pretty short, simple to do, but next week we'll be using some of these techniques for another kind of similar effect, but a lot more time-consuming to do. So keep an eye out for next week's tutorial, and we'll see how that goes. And until then, guys, have a nice week. Whatever.